Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vedyagravinam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vishvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So did we finish chapter 4 last week?
No, not quite.
Would you poke the little box there? What verse are we on?
67.
Chapter 4, verse 67.
Vikshepo yasya nastasya brahmavitvam na manyate brahmaivayam iti prahu purnaya paradarshinaha. That man whose mind is not subject to distraction is not merely a knower of Brahman, but Brahman itself. So declare the sages versed in the scriptures of Vedanta.
So this is a very subtle point. The scriptures talk about being a knower of Brahman. And then here Vidyaranya says, well, he's not only a knower of Brahman, but he is Brahman. And what we want to understand is there's two kinds of knowledge we're dealing with here. First is the real knowledge. By real, I mean with a big old capital R. What is the instrument by which the self is known? The scriptures say it cannot be known through the senses, through the mind, through the intellect. Speech does not go there, yet it is knowable. The self is self-evident. How do you know you are you? You do not see, hear, taste, touch, smell, emote, or think yourself. That you are not unknown. And the great cosmic joke is everybody already has that. So, the other kind of knowledge the scriptures talk about is this awakening of the subtle intellect. When the buddhi becomes buddha, when we have the pratyabhijnanam, the recognition. Now, this is not a kind of knowledge to be gained merely by reading scripture and listening to the Guru. That gives us an indirect knowledge. It comes as a direct experience. What do I mean? In a mind made very quiet, through spiritual practices of various kinds, essentially, when all of the vasana has been removed, been renounced, been annihilated, the mind thunders to a stop. And the avarana shakti, the veiling power, which is in the intellect, it's gone. And the mind thunders to a stop. Only I remain. Then when the mind returns, it remembers that and goes, oh, I get it. I'm not a person. I am that partless Brahman. So in the intellect, we get the recognition, the knower of Brahman. But what does he realize or she realize? I am that Brahman. So other scriptures will frame it this way. Both bondage and liberation occur to the mind. The self is ever free. What is my bondage? The deeply rooted conviction that I'm bound. I think I'm my body. What is liberation? The deeply rooted conviction in the mind. Rooted in direct experience. Not that I'm a realized person, but I am that grounded being. Later on, Vidyaranya is going to use the term kutusta. Someone who is still like a mountain. That's where I am. Any thoughts about this?
Jim, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you say something about what he means by not distracted?
So, when the mind still is distracted, it isn't subtle enough to see, to grasp. The mind needs to be very, very subtle to see it. To do this final discrimination between the real self and the thought of self. Experientially, when you tune up the mind, then the teacher will say something like, now listen to the traffic, or focus your mind on the sound of the bird. Now, who hears? What hears? And your mind has to be so subtle, so quiet, to apprehend that there's nothing there. But if there's a lot of chugga, 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 chugga going on, you'll miss it. You won't see it. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Next verse.
दर्शनादर्शने हित्वा स्वयं केवलरूपतः यस्ति षष्ठी स तु ब्रह्मन् ब्रह्मवित् स्वयं. One whose mind does no longer dwell on whether he knows Brahman or not, but who remains identified with pure consciousness or knowledge, is not merely a knower of Brahman, but Brahman itself.
Yes. So, as we advance in this practice, many of us are afflicted by the thought, do I know it? Maybe I don't know it. Am I being arrogant? Am I fooling myself? Is this it? Is this not it? Sure, none of you have ever had thoughts like that. And here Vidyaranya is saying, don't get caught up in that oscillation. The one who's concerned about whether or not he knows or not is the ego. Drop that. Or the poetic language that Gita uses in the second chapter. He who knows it not, no, he who knows it not. I know Brahman, I've read all the Upanishads, I understand it completely. He doesn't know. He who knows it not knows it. The one whose mind can just be stupefied. Stop the mind. And this is where the guru can be helpful. Because if your guru is one who himself has retired into the self, we have that capacity to tune up to the guru. Swamiji used to say, meet me there. Becomes very, very obvious. We need no words at that point. Don't try to be an enlightened person. Know you are Brahman. Now, there's another trap that can happen. Some of us, Nirvikalpa Samadhi is this big bwang experience. Ego's shattered and gone. And then sometimes we get what's called second mind or enlightenment sickness. The ego reforms with the idea, I know something significant, and I want to tell everybody about it. These people, I'm not saying they're not knowers of Brahman, but they've got this second mind. And you can usually tell it because they really want to tell you about what their experience is. That needs to be dropped away. Swamiji, almost never talked about his own experience. He would be asked, Swamiji, are you enlightened? And he would say, see me standing at the doorway, ushering you through. But his capacity to turn our minds back on our own self-nature was incredible. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
जीवन मुक्ते पराकाष्ठा जीवद्वैत विवर्जनात् लभ्यते सावतोत्रेदम् ईशद्वैतात् द्विवेचितम्. This liberation in life is the final step attained by sublating or removing the mental creations of the jiva projected on the world of Ishvara. So in this chapter, we have described how the duality created by the jiva differs from that created by Ishvara.
So, Jivan Mukta, the person who's liberated while alive, has removed two superimpositions. Imposition of the upadis, the equipment, the body, mind, intellect on the self, and the superimposition of the jagat, the phenomenal world, on the self. Any thoughts? Any doubts, questions? Is that in this chapter?
Yeah, that's the last verse.
All right, so now we start chapter 5, which is a shorty.
Panchamodhyayah Mahavakya Viveka. Chapter 5, Fixing the Meaning of the Great Sayings. So
these Mahavakyas are taken from the Upanishads. We normally talk about 4 of them. Prajnanam Brahma, Ayamatma Brahma, Tattvamasi, and Aham Brahmasmi. But there are others that can be put in that category. One of my favorites is Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. Let's see how Vidyaranya approaches this.
Yenekshate shrinotidam jikrati vyakaroti cha swadvasvadu vijanati tatpragnyanam udiritam. That by which a man sees, hears, smells, speaks, and distinguishes sweet and bitter taste, etc., is called consciousness.
So, what is the knowing principle? Who is the knower of the field in every field? That is called consciousness. Next one.
Chaturmukhendra deveshu manushya shavagadishu chaitanyam eka brahmanat pragyanam brahma mayapi. The one consciousness which is in Brahma, Indra, and other gods, as well as in human beings, horses, cows, etc., is Brahman. So the consciousness in me also is Brahman.
So, Prajnanam Brahma, that consciousness is Brahman. and it is the knower in gods, humans, cows, etc. Wherever there is knowing, that knower is consciousness, awareness itself. And that awareness is Brahma. Prajnanam Brahma, the first of the Mahavakyas. Any thoughts on this? So, where this becomes important is, what is God? What is God's nature? Does God have a form? Does God have three heads, like you see sometimes in various idols? Is God Krishna or is it Shiva? You know, or is it Allah instead of Yahweh? Which is the real God? Which is the false God? What form is God? Is God a sky daddy? That's the one a lot of people who have been religiously abused say, my God is not a sky daddy. What is the truth of God? Prajnanam Brahma. Brahman, ultimate reality, is consciousness. Now, this word prajnana, the Buddhists will use this word, and it is frequently then translated as intuition. But the Vedantins translate it as chit, as awareness itself, as consciousness itself. Much deeper than intuition by our normal understanding. Any thoughts? Next verse.
Paripurna paratmasmin dehe vidyadhikarini buddhe sakshitaya sthitva sphuran naham itiryate. The infinite supreme self remains manifested in this world as the witness of the functions of the intellect in the body, fit for self-knowledge, and is designated as I.
So now he defines what it means by I. I am that which is the knower of everything that seems to reside in the body. I do this, I do that. But is that really what I am? What is designated by the first person pronoun, aham. What is designated by the word Atman. Atman simply means self in Sanskrit. Sometimes we talk about the Jivatman, the individual self, as opposed to Paramatman, supreme self. What about all those distinctions? What do we mean by aham? I. Next verse.
Swata purna paratmatra brahma shabdena varnitaha asmityekya param arshtena brahma bhavamyam aham. By nature infinite, the Supreme Self is described here and by the word Brahman. The word Asmi, am, denotes the identity of Aham, I, and Brahman. Therefore, I am Brahman is the meaning of the text.
Yes, so he's now talking about the fourth one that I enumerated. I am Brahman. I'm not the body. I'm not that karta, that agent that's in the intellect. I'm not that individual sense of self. My very experience of I and Brahman, which is consciousness, aham brahma asmi, aham brahmasmi, I am Brahma. Notice the last Mahavakya doesn't say, I'm a knower of Brahman, I'm a saint, I'm a Muni, I'm a Mahatma. No. What is the nature of I am Brahman. So here, that which is designated as I, the self and everything, its real meaning is Brahman. That's what the scripture says. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Ekam eva dvitiyam san namarupa vivirjitam srishte puradhunapyasya tadriktvam tadirtiyate. Before the creation, there existed the reality, one only, without a second, and without name and form. That it even now, after creation, exists in a similar condition is indicated by the word that.
So now he's going to start talking about Tattvamasi. What does Tat mean? That consciousness that was there before the universe manifested, the universe issued forth by means of sankalpa from that. At the end of the age, it will merge back into that. That is another name for Brahman. Purnam Adaha. That is full being consciousness. That's what's indicated by the word Tat in scripture. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Shrotur dehendriyatitam vastatva tvam paderitam ekata grahyate siti tadaikyam anubhuyatam. The principle of consciousness, which transcends the body, senses, and mind of the inquirer, is here denoted by the word Tao. The word Asi shows their identity. That identity has to be experienced.
So this one, Tattvam Asi, that thou art, actually, I don't know if we've talked about this. The word thou in English is second person familiar. It's like tú in Spanish, as opposed to usted. It's familiar. So that's all thou means. You means you. So you, the very experience of what you are, a little old me. Here, the Mahavakya says, you are that Brahman, that's the ground of being that was there before the universe came into being. But you must come to experience it. So here Vidyaranya implies what the tradition says. This particular Mahavakya is known as the Upadesha Mahavakya. Upadesha means to instruct or to teach. So all the various branches of yoga are implied by this particular utterance, great utterance of the Upanishads. Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Kriya Yoga, Sufism, Buddhism, mystical Christianity, indigenous practices all over the world. All of them point to coming to the direct experience. You are that. You've heard it, go experience it directly. First is paroksha jnanam, indirect knowledge through the teacher and the scriptures. Then aparoksha jnanam, your own direct experience, which comes about abhyasa vairagya cha, through your own practice and intense renunciation of our attachments to the world and to any personal sense of self. Any thoughts? Next verse.
स्वप्रकाशापरोक्षत्वम् अयम् इत्युक्ततो मतम् अहङ्कारादिदेहान्तात् प्रत्यगात्मेति गीयते. By pronouncing the word this, it is meant that the Atman is self-luminous and directly experienced. That is known as Pratyagatman, which is the indwelling principle covering everything between egoity and the body.
Read it again, please.
By pronouncing the word, quote, this, it is meant that the Atman is self-luminous and directly experienced. That is known as Pratyagatman, which is the indwelling principle covering everything between egoity and the body.
So this, I think, is another Mahavakya, Pratyagatman. So this is that consciousness. Here meaning what's the indwelling me is that Brahman. Right now, because of superimposition, I think I'm the body. I think I'm the personality. What I need to do is come to directly experience. That self is just Chidakasha, the space of pure awareness. Next one.
Vishram anasya sarvasya jagattastattvamiyate brahma shabdena tad brahma swaprakashatma rupakam. The essence of the entire visible universe is denoted by the word Brahman. That Brahman is of the nature of the self-luminous Atman.
Yes. So here we're now working on the identity of the self, the ground of being in me, the witnessing consciousness, denoted by the word Atman, and Brahman, the ground of being of the whole universe. I suspect he's pointing now, I am Atma, Brahma, this self is Brahman. Going on.
That was the last verse of this chapter.
Okay, it's a shorty. So here basically, as many of the gurus do when they're doing a prakara in a text, when they put forward basic ideas, they footnote. Yeah, this is my direct experience. This is my understanding of the philosophy. But now let me tell you what scripture says, which is the authority for these ideas. All right, shorty chapter. Let's make our way into chapter 6, which is a fascinating one.
Shashtodhyaya Chitradipah. Chapter 6, the lamp of the picture.
Yes.
Yatha chitrapate drishtam avasthanam chatushthayam paratmani vigyeyam tathavastha chatushtayam. As there are 4 stages in the painting of a picture, so there are 4 stages in the modification of the Supreme Self.
So, what he's going to talk about is using the painting of a picture as a metaphor, as an allegory of consciousness manifesting in the world. So you've got to think of a canvas nailed to a frame. It's the white canvas and it's been prepared. And then the artist has the paint colors. Now, in classical Indian painting, what they would do is they would draw the outline of the figure first in black, then fill in the colors in those shapes. It's not the same as Western kinds of painting. The craft of the art is a bit different. So understanding that slight difference in the way traditional painting is done, Vidyaranya's metaphor will make more sense. Going on.
Yatha dhauto dadrishtashya lachanto sanjita pataha chidantar yami sutratma virat chatma tatheryate. In a picture, we have the clean canvas, stiffening with starch, drawing of the outlines, and the application of color. In the case of the self, there are correspondingly the pure consciousness, the indwelling consciousness, the one identified with the totality of all subtle bodies, and that with the totality of all the physical bodies.
So he's going to use this idea as an allegory. So let's see now how he breaks down this similarity. Going on.
Swata shubhrotra dhauta chak swata shubhautra dhauta syat khattito na vilepanat mashya karaila ichhantah syadhrajinto varnapurnanat. The naturally white canvas is the basis of the picture. By the application of starch, it is stiffened, the outlines are drawn with a black pencil, and when the appropriate colors are applied to it, the picture is complete.
So he's describing how you make a classical, traditional painting. These steps. Going on.
Swata chidantar yamitu mayavi sukshma srishtitah sutratma sthula srishthyaiva viradyuchyate paraha. Brahman by nature is pure consciousness. With Maya, he is called the indwelling spirit. In relation to the subtle bodies, he is the totality of souls identifying himself with them, and in relation to the gross bodies, he is again the one identifying himself with their totality.
So all of it's Brahman. But now he breaks down. First, he describes this Brahman, the ground of being, which is like the canvas. Then the indwelling spirit, the Maya Shakti, the Ishvara Bhava, the being of wishing and willing. Then it becomes the sense of I in every living being. And then further grossifies into the various jivas and the bodies, and then ultimately into rocks and rivers and mountains and stars and everything. Going on.
Brahmadhyastambha paryanta praninotra jada api uttam adham abhavena vartante patachitravat. As in a picture on a canvas, there are superior and inferior objects. So in the Supreme Lord, there are grades of beings from Brahma down to the animate and inanimate objects.
So you can look at a picture, and let's say it's a picture of Lord Krishna surrounded by the gopis. So we see the one on the wall there. So there's Krishna, he's the central figure. But then there are other figures around him, the gopis. But what's he got in his hands? He's playing a flute, an inanimate object. And he and all the gopis have lovely garments on. And then down in the corner, there's a bunch of peacocks. I can't see that well. What other objects do you see in the picture? Are there trees as well?
Lotuses?
Lotuses? So you have things that are very important, Krishna and the gopis. You've got less important things. Then you've got just trivial things like the garments that the people in the painting are wearing. So also the Lord creates avatars, saints, a whole lot of just ordinary people, and whales, and elephants, and lions, and worms, amoebas, and rocks, and rivers. All of it comes about by the work of the mad painter. I shouldn't call him a mad painter. That's just an image I like to use when I see the sky. By the great artist, the great architect of it all. Any thoughts on this? And the whole idea is this entire universe is like a movie show. Of course, they didn't have movies back when Vidyaranya was writing. On the screen of consciousness itself. Now, this whole metaphor gets updated by Ramana Maharshi. It's a little bit easier to understand. The self consciousness is like the lamp in the movie projector. Mind is like the film in the projector. We can look at it microcosmically, my mind, or macrocosmically, total mind. And what I see out there as the world is really just what was on the film projector. All the names and forms are just images in mind projected out. movie moves, the images seem to move on the screen. Stop them, film from moving, and the people in the movie stop. That's all it is. Now, when we have these expressions in scriptures like destroy the world, reduce the world to ashes, destroy the mind, manunasha, people take it too literally, literalistically, and think that the highest state is some enfeeblement of the mind or a non-perception of the world. That's not what it means. It means to see it for what it is. It is like the 4-year-old who looks out the window and sees the rainbow and says, "Mommy, get in the car. Let's go find the end of the rainbow. I know it's just down the block." The rainbow is seen, but what the child thinks it is not what it is. So you and I see a world of name and form. And to destroy the world, to open the jnana Ch6, is to see it for what it is, the play of consciousness, not external objects that are inherently joy-giving and misery-producing. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Chitrarpitam anupyanam vastrabhasa prithak prithak chitradharena vastrena sadrisha iva kalpitaha. The men in a picture are painted wearing clothes of different kinds, and the clothes are so painted that they appear as real as the canvas of the picture.
So if the artist is clever and talented, clothes look like they have folds, they're just so beautiful and stuff like that. What comes to my mind more than that is like when you see a Greek statue where they have the folds of the togas, the stuff like that, and you'd swear it was soft cloth, but it's stone. So also, there's perspective. It looks like you can go back into the picture. No, it's flat. It's all an illusion created by the artist. Going on.
Prithak prithak chidat bhasa chaitanyadhyasta dehinam kalpyante jivanamano bahudha sansaranyami. On consciousness are superimposed various forms. In each of them, there is a reflection that is a special function of consciousness. They are known as the jivas and are subject to the process of birth and death.
Yes, so on the canvas of consciousness, the Lord paints these reflections of consciousness called the jivas, which seem to be born and die, go through various experiences of pleasure and suffering, gain and loss, success and failure. So you are a character. You as an individual. God's picture. Next one.
वस्त्राभासस्थितान् वर्णान् यद्वधा धार वस्त्रगान् वदन्त्याज्ञास्तस्था जीवस् संसारं चिद्गतं विदुः. Ignorant people imagine that the colors representing the clothes of the figures are real clothes, as real as the canvas on which the picture is superimposed. Similarly, the ignorant imagine that the transmigrations of the jivas are undergone by the Supreme Spirit, the substratum on which the jivas are superimposed.
So, a much more real example of it. If you look at the carpet down there, you see the snake on the carpet? There's no snake on the carpet. That's black thread. There's no snake. There's a snake on my carpet. No. What is there is wool carpet. So all this is Brahman. And all the various jivas, the individuals, their real nature, Brahman and Brahman alone. But in ignorance, I think I come and go. I go from lifetime to lifetime. When in fact, I goes nowhere. Kutastha. I am still unmoved. Any thoughts on this? Next one.
चित्रस्थ पर्वतादीनां वस्त्राभासो न लिख्यते सृष्टिस्थम् इत्रिकादीनां चिदाभासस्तथा नहि. Just as the hills, etc., in a picture are not painted as dressed in clothes, so the inert objects like earth are not endowed with the reflection of consciousness.
Yes. So just as in a picture, only certain forms get to wear clothes, the hills do not. So also in this world, the stones, the water, the hills, the clouds are not endowed with the reflection of consciousness. Only beings have that. And the capacity to self-inquire. Maybe other animals can do it, but certainly humans have that capacity. Next one.
Sansara paramarthoyam sallagna swatma vastuni iti bhranti pravidya syat vidya yesha nivartate. The confusion of considering this transmigration with the attendant pain and pleasure as real and affecting the Supreme Self is called nescience. It is removed by the knowledge of reality.
So, what is my problem? Both Figuranya and Shankara thunder. I do not have an ontological problem. My problem is not that I have a problem of being. It's not who I am is not enough or flawed and needs to be fixed. Any effort to fix myself is doomed to failure. It's like trying to put a different set of clothes on a hologram. My problem is one of knowledge. It's an epistemological problem. Problem is ignorance. Where does that ignorance occur? In my mind. Because I do not know who I am. I superimpose the qualities of the not-self onto the self. That's the problem. Antidote to ignorance is knowledge. Latest example I've been using in class is I watch Antiques Roadshow. There's one episode where this lady brings this brooch she inherited from an old relative. She had it appraised, and the appraiser said it's basically costume jewelry, worth a couple $100. Big old gaudy thing. Victorian. She takes it to the Antiques Roadshow. She's kept it in a drawer. She says, no, this is a real star sapphire. And it's encrusted with real diamonds. And it's not silver, it's platinum. And it's worth $250,000. What? It did not change. It was what it was. But what changed? Her knowledge of what it was. And her capacity to enjoy it. So also, you and I already are the self. But in my mind, I do not know it. Instead, I think myself is costume jewelry. I'm cheap. I'm worthless. I belong in the sock drawer. No. Who you really are is the pearl of great price. Who you really are is the Chintamani, the wish-fulfilling gem. But we have to discover that ourselves. Next verse.
आत्मा भासस्य जीवस्य संसारो नात्मवस्तुनः इति बोधो भवेत् विद्या लभ्यते सौविचारणात्. It is the jiva, a reflection of the self, which is affected by the pain and pleasure of this transmigratory life, but not the real self. This understanding is called knowledge. It is achieved through discrimination.
So, what is the jiva? I love the way Shankara lays it out as he goes through his negation of the five koshas. He gets to the Vijnanamaya kosha, the subtle intellect. And in it, he says there's a function called karta, he calls it, which means doer. And the function of that doer is to attribute to the self the qualities of the not self. So it seems like I got up this morning and I made coffee and I skipped lunch and came home and had lunch. And I had some oatmeal for dinner. When in fact, these are the activities of the body and the mind and the intellect, which I always witness. But in the intellect, it's attributed to the self. And there's nothing wrong with this, as long as you know it's not you. You don't have to talk funny to be a Vedanta. I use the example, have you seen a sunset lately? No, you've never seen a sunset. You've seen an earth spin. But we've known that since we were kids. But nobody talks like that. So you can talk in your what we call vyavahara, your transactions, like an ordinary person. Don't be weird. But you, in your understanding, I go nowhere. I do nothing. I am still. It is the equipment that acts, and I'm ever the witness of it. Never touched by it. And this knowledge changes the mind. It frees the mind from fear. It frees the mind from anxiety. Frees the mind from its stress that it has when the mind is believing superimpositions is real. Next verse.
Sada vicharayet tasmat jagat jiva paratmanah jiva bhava jagat bhava bodhe swatmaiva shishyate. Therefore, one should always inquire into the nature of the world, the individual self and the supreme self. When the ideas of jiva and jagat, world, are negated, the pure Atman alone remains.
Yes. So we have two areas of inquiry. Koham, who am I? What is my essential nature? Discriminating between the equipment and the true self, like we did in the chapter of the negation of the five koshas. And inquiring into this world. What is this world and how has it come about? This world, it too is Brahman. And it's come about by means of Sankalpa, the Maya Shakti of the infinite. That's what we discussed in the fourth chapter. Constantly maintaining this jnana abhyasa, this practice of knowledge. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Pratitaisya kintu mithyatva nishchayah no chet sushupti murchadau muchetayatna tojanah. By negation, it does not mean that the world and jiva cease to be perceptible to the senses. It means the conviction of their illusory character. Otherwise, people would be automatically liberated in deep sleep or in a faint.
Yes. So here he reiterates what I was talking about earlier. The negation of the jiva, the negation of the world, does not mean the non-perception of it. Or to frame it in different language, we talk about achieving nirvikalpa samadhi. Nirvikalpa samadhi is useful. It is the mind state of the cessation of all mentation. In that state, it's very clear that the individuality and the world are dependent on the functioning of the mind. Listen carefully. Nirvikalpa is not the highest state. Sahaja samadhi is the highest state. Sahaja samadhi means natural or continuous samadhi, which is the knowledge that this karta, this doer, this jiva, and the phenomenal world are just projections. They're just illusions. Those of us who've studied Tripura Rahasyam, there's this very funny scene where Hemachuda has gone deep into samadhi and he's like a drunkard. Hemaleka comes and pulls on his robe. My Lord, my Lord. He opens his eyes and says, go away, kid, don't bother me. How is it that you, knowing of this state, you're not in it all the time? I'm going to go back to my samadhi. And she says, my Lord, how can it be perfection if its gain or loss is achieved by the opening or the closing of the eyes, the length of 8 grains of barley? Then Hemachuda begins to see the illusory nature of the world. Most of Tripura Rahasya is about the dream-like nature of the world. This is our deep knowledge. Then, seen but not real. Any thoughts on this? With the eye of understanding, with the eye of wisdom, we see the destruction of the world. Not it all turns to mist. I mean that. Okay, what verse are we on for next week?
Verse 14.
Verse 49?
14.
Verse 14. Yeah. Now, back on chapter 5, I think I made an error. I think the last Mahavakya that he talked about was Ayamatma Brahma. And I misspoke there. So he was using that verse to finally talk about that of the 4. So he did Prajnanam Brahma, then he did Aham Brahmasmi, then he did Tattvamasi, then the last one he did was Ayamatma Brahma. So he went through them in that order, which is a different order than I usually take. All right. Any other thoughts before we end tonight? Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Sri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om.